Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Like many of you, I'm feeling the Sunbreak hype more and more as we move closer into 2022. We've been getting a lot of new information about Rise this month, and I'm working on a digital event speculation video that just won't be ready in time, so for this week I figured I would do some light wishlisting and speculation. The last time I made a video like this, I just focused on 3 monsters I would love to see in Sunbreak that were more than likely not getting in, but in this video I'm talking about the flagship monsters. Rise currently has a lot of flagships already, so I think we will keep seeing more flagships added to Sunbreak, especially since the flagships tend to be the fan favorite monsters and quite a few of them actually fit into the theme that Sunbreak has. In this video, I am going to take a close look at the flagships of Monster Hunter generations and talk about my thoughts about them in Sunbreak. Monster Hunter Generations was unique in many ways, one of them being that it had 4 flagships to represent each of the 4 generations. These 4 monsters were Glavenus, Mizutsune, Astalos, and Gammoth. Because these monsters were the flagship of the same game, they were all put in a group with each other and given the nickname the Fated Four. Most people are familiar with Glavenus since they added him into Iceborne, so I am just going to give a general overview of him. Being that Glavenus was most people's favorite of the Fated Four, it's no wonder why he was added into Iceborne. The main feature of Glavenus is that his tail is a blade made out of melted rocks and ores. Glavenus is able to sharpen his tail blade with specialized fangs, and the debris that results from the sharpening process is stored in Glavenus' throat, which allows him to spit exploding piles of molten rocks. In the context of Sunbreak, I think Glavenus is very likely to get in. The first reason is that Glavenus fits the theme of Rise perfectly. Based on all of the monsters we've seen in Sunbreak, they all fit the theme of Western mythological creatures. As the very obvious ones, we have Malzeno, which is designed off of a vampire, and Linagarin, which is designed off of a werewolf. The less obvious one is Shogun Senator, which seems to have many similarities to a centaur. This is even reflected in the ecology video, since in the video we see Shogun preventing a group of Ludroth from leaving a cave, and from what I remember about Greek mythology, centaurs were supposed to have a gatekeeper-type role. Even in Rise, we see that the returning monsters chosen still try to keep the theme of Japanese yokai, including monsters you wouldn't expect to like Anjanath, Tobi-Kadachi, Zenogre, and Tigrex. Glavenus fits the theme that Sunbreak has, since he is themed after a sword. In one of the localization notes for Monster Hunter Generations, when they talked about some of the ideas they went through when designing and naming Glavenus, one of the themes they went very heavy into is the sword, because, sword tail. Interestingly enough, the first part of Glavenus' name is based on the Latin word gladio, which means sword. So, why does Glavenus having a sword theme make him a good fit thematically for Sunbreak? Not only are there many mythical swords in Western culture, such as Excalibur, but there is one that already has a direct connection to Glavenus. In that same localization note, they talk about some of the alternative names that they wanted to give to Glavenus, and one of the names they considered was Dynigris, which was based on Dyrnwyn, a legendary flaming sword of Welsh lore. Obviously we didn't get that name, but Glavenus' connection with a flaming Welsh sword parallels the connections that returning monsters in Rise have with the yokai attributed to them. It also isn't a stretch to say that we could get a monster themed off of an inanimate object, since Aknasum is designed off of the Karakas Obake, or an umbrella yokai. The second reason I think we are going to see Glavenus in Sunbreak is because of how popular Glavenus is. An important aspect of any Monster Hunter game is to basically appease the fans through the monster roster, and Glavenus is definitely one of the monsters that people adore. I don't think this will happen at all, but if Glavenus does come back then I really hope acidic Glavenus does too, mainly because I actually liked acidic a lot more than regular Glavenus. The last reason I think we are getting Glavenus is actually because of Shogun Senator. It's no surprise that the apex monsters in Rise are basically the deviants from Generations. Like all expansions, Sunbreak is bound to add more apex monsters to the roster, presumably following the same pattern of apexes in Rise. In Generations Ultimate, Shogun Senator was given a deviant by the name of Rust Razor Senator that was much more deadly than regular Shogun. The reason for that is because instead of having its normal shell, or the Gravio's skull, it uses a Glavenus skull to sharpen its arms and make them razor sharp. So, given that the apex monsters in Rise are created by basically being abused rampage, it would make sense for Shogun Senator to become an apex monster by taking a Glavenus skull in an attempt to survive the brutal nature of rampages. Of course, this last point is dependent on Shogun Senator even getting an apex, since Rise has monsters like Tigrex and Nargacuga, who have a deviant form in Generations, but no apex in Rise. However, I do think the combination of all three of these points makes Main think that Glavenus will return in Sunbreak. The next member of the Fated Four is Gammoth, a massive snow-covered fanged beast. Unfortunately, Gammoth is the least favorite of the Fated Four, and I suspect the reason for that is that Gammoth doesn't have a flashy mechanic like the other members. Glavenus has his tail, and its temperature as a special mechanic. Mizutsune has the bubble system, and as we will go in depth about later, Astalos has a supercharging mechanic. However, Gammoth's gimmick is more or less just that she's just massive and can't even fit on the screen when you're right next to her. I think the other reason was that specifically in Generations, you could just cheese the entire Gammoth hunt by attacking her back legs, since once they were broken there was nothing she could do to counter that. In G rank they did remedy that by having her attack more with her back legs, like kicking, and even sitting on you, but it still wasn't enough to completely eliminate the cheese. Other than the cheese, the Gammoth hunt is actually very fun. She attacks the hunter by charging towards them with her massive tusks, using her trunk to throw snow and the hunters around, and even just throwing her body around. Looking at Sunbreak, I am a bit mixed on if we could see Gammoth. On the one hand, Gammoth does have connections to Western myths and legends like Glavenus. You may have thought about this at first seeing Gammoth and her name, but one of the sources used as an inspiration is a mastodon, a large elephant-like creature that went extinct a very long time ago. The less obvious Western connection actually comes from the G in Gammoth's name. I had originally just assumed that Gammoth was named that because it's just mammoth with a G in front of it just to make it different, but in another localization note from Capcom they explain that it actually is a reference to Ganesha, a Hindu deity known for his elephant head and being the remover of obstacles, which is definitely reflected in Gammoth's grand stature and power. Sunbreak also provides a perfect opportunity to address the problems we saw with Gammoth in Generations, since Rise reworked the monsters in the game to be better suited against the mobility of the hunters. Gammoth also makes sense for Sunbreak because of her body type. One of the complaints with World and Iceborne was that there wasn't a lot of variety with the monsters in the game, just a lot of flying wyverns, brute wyverns, and elder dragons. Rise really made the effort to give us more of a variety of monsters, not just with their body type, but with unique fights as well. And on top of that, one of the community complaint with Rise is that there are no spectacle hunts, or hunts where you find a giant monster like Dalamadur or Kulftar-Roth. Gammoth fits perfectly with these two categories, since Gammoth has a one-of-a-kind body type and is a massive monster. However, the reason I'm mixed about Gammoth is because she never got the attention from fans she deserved. Like I mentioned with Glavenus, fan demand also plays an important role in deciding what monsters get into the game, and unfortunately Gammoth doesn't have much of that. With that being said, I don't think Gammoth's connections to Ganesha and mastodons should be ignored. The last member of the Fated Four is actually my personal favorite, Astalos, a thunder-flying wyvern with an attitude problem. I don't know how widespread this phrase is, but Astalos is a very good example of small dog syndrome. Astalos is a smaller flying wyvern than normal, but it makes up for it by being incredibly aggressive in its attacks. As I mentioned earlier, Astalos has a special supercharging mechanic, where he is able to use electricity to charge parts of his body to make them more powerful, similar to Magnamalo, with the key difference being that the supercharged parts become very powerful, strong enough to send hunters flying backwards until they slam against a wall. Astalos is designed after an insect, with the last part of his Japanese name actually being the German word for insect. I don't know if there is a specific insect Astalos is based off of, but to me Astalos reminds me a lot of a dragonfly, especially with the forked tail and the design on his wings. I love that Astalos feels like a combination of rat halos and Diablos, since Astalos really likes to charge at you from the air and has quite a few versions of that. Looking at Sunbreak, Astalos doesn't really have much going for them based on the theme of Sunbreak alone. While there are lots of insects mentioned in Western myths and legends, not many of them really match with Astalos well. Interestingly, dragonflies themselves are viewed as sinister in many European cultures, and in Swedish folklore dragonflies are used to weigh people's souls. Despite these connections, they don't seem as strong as the connections Glavenus and Gammoth have. With that being said, Astalos still was a very popular monster that people have been really asking to come back since Glavenus was in Iceborne and Mizutsune was in Rise. So looking at all three of these flagships, will we see them in Sunbreak? I think we will see Glavenus, not only because of Glavenus' connection to mythological swords, but like I mentioned earlier, Sunbreak will definitely try to mirror Iceborne as close as it can to address a lot of the community complaints against Rise, and one of the ways they can do that is by bringing the fan-adored monsters. As for the other two, I really don't know. There is a weird situation with the Fated Four, since all of them are grouped together. I could see Sunbreak adding Glavenus alone, but I can't see Capcom adding Glavenus and Gammoth, while leaving Astalos completely out of the game. The only situation I could see where that would work is if they add Astalos in one of the title updates Sunbreak will get, but again, I don't want to speculate about the title updates when we don't even have the first trailer for the game. So while I am pretty confident that we will see Glavenus in Sunbreak, I think Gammoth also has a good chance. I'm not going to say that I don't think Astalos will be in Sunbreak, because at the Tokyo Game Show presentation they did say monsters like Volstrax didn't have a yokai equivalent and were basically added for fun, but I will say that looking at the theme of Sunbreak alone and completely ignoring fan demand, Astalos doesn't seem to have a good chance. I had originally wanted to talk about all of the series flagships that weren't in the game, but I spent so much time talking about the rest of the Fated Four that I ran out of time. I am very curious about what you guys think about the interesting situation of Glavenus, Mizutsune, Astalos, and Gammoth. Do you think Capcom could get away with adding 3 of the 4 without making people upset? I don't know at all, so please share your thoughts about it. I had a lot of fun researching and looking at the localization notes, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. If you can, then please like the video and consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.